Oh, goody.
Alright, what's going on everybody? Zombies here again. It's Derek back with another Marvel Snap video. So in this one we're going over some quick OTA changes, and then we're going to take a look at 7 different decks to try out with these new OTA changes that should be live as of the time of this releasing. So we have 2 buffs and 3 nerfs this patch. First nerf patch in a while. Starting out with the buffs, we have the Doom bots making their way back to 5 power. I think the nerf to Doom was pretty unwarranted, so I'm really happy to see him be returned to his former glory. Lady Deathstrike is getting a buff as well, going from a 5-3 to a 5-4. Maybe this card will finally have a bit more potential, only time will tell. And then we have some nerfs. Up first, Legion, unsurprisingly, I think about everyone and their mother predicted this card was going to take a hit on power, so I don't really think anyone's surprised to see this. 5/8s that have really powerful effects are generally really good in the game, and have gotten changed to 7 before, so seeing Legion changed here isn't that big of a surprise. Then another card losing 1 power here is Captain Marvel. She was buffed to a 4 cost last OTA, has been a really big star in the recent move decks, and not too surprised to see this change. I think she'll still be a pretty decent card, but not quite as powerful as she was at the 5 power stat line. And then we have the weirdest change of the bunch, and that is to Rock Slide. Rock Slide is going from a 4-5 to a 3-3. This is a really strange change to me. They talk about it a bit in the notes, saying how they want the Darkhawk deck to be more concentrated in power with Darkhawk, and they believe that changing Rock Slide to a 3-3 will allow the Darkhawk package to find its way in a variety of decks outside of just Zabu shells. Not the hugest on this change. I don't think it's great. I don't think it's terrible. At the very least, I'm interested to try Darkhawk in a non-Zabu deck to see how it feels. And Rock Slide will now be consistently coming down on turn 3 without Zabu, however, he is losing some power because of it. Definitely a more surprising one of the bunch, as I don't think Darkhawk decks are really even crazy common anymore, at least in the meta we've been seeing recently, so this one feels a little bit like it's out of left field. Before we take a look at the decks, I do want to make note of something that wasn't changed this patch, and that is the Brood Absorbing Man deck. A lot of players are considering it to be the best deck. I think when you get the high roll, perfect curve, it's really good and pretty hard to interact with, and I'll be surprised if that deck sticks around long term. However, due to it being a newer deck, it sounds like they haven't had very much time to collect data on if it needs to be nerfed and how they want to nerf it. So I think that's one we're definitely going to see get changed in future weeks. However, it is worth noting that is not happening during this week's OTA. Starting off though, we're going to take a look at some Doom decks. I absolutely love Dr. Doom. He was one of my favorite 6-drops. Doom Wave is a personal favorite archetype of mine, and I'm really glad to see it come back into the game. The nerf to his Doom bots was pretty devastating, pushed Doom out of the game pretty hard, so excited to see him come back in his former glory. Here we have a wave version of the High Evolutionary deck. This one was popularized by W Snap, and I really like this deck. If you want to play High Evolutionary, I think this is one of the better ways to do it. Here we're making use of some of the more powerful High Evolutionary cards, such as Misty Knight, Cyclops, and Hulk, as well as Wave to limit our opponent to playing only 1 card on the final turn of the game, and trying to close out the game with an impactful 6-drop that also lets us flow energy to get benefit out of our evolved cards. We have Chavez here for some early game consistency, as we really value getting our 1-drops and other cards early on in the game. Pretty important, especially getting Wave on turn 5. She's also not the worst thing in the world to be dropping on the final turn, assuming we don't get our other main finishers here, being Doom, which lets us go wide, and Hulk, which lets us go tall. The combination of Doom and Hulk here is really nice, as I imagine it's going to make it very difficult for opponents to reliably predict which thing you're going to slam on the final turn of the game, and due to their limitation of only being able to play 1 card on the final turn as well, it puts them in an awkward position where they have to guess right or risk losing the game. We're also running armor here as a bit of protection, as we really value our 1-drops as well as our big Hulk and Chavez, so we don't want them getting blown up anytime soon. And Mr. Fantastic allows us to go wide and help maintain priority going into that final wave turn. And last but not least, we have Jeff here, who just is a really flexible 2-drop and is especially good with Wave, as we really value being able to move our points around the board on that final turn when we're limited to only playing 1 card. Next up is an updated version of the deck I used to conquer the Infinity Conquest this month, and that is Aero Wave. So this is a version of the tempo move deck that's been pretty popular. This deck has the same very powerful tempo move core that's very popular right now in one of the main meta decks. However, instead of using Angela and Kitty Pryde, we're opting to use Wave here as a way to lock out the opponent to 1 card on the final turn, so that way they really can't get benefit off of playing their Kitty they've been juicing up throughout the game. And typically we've been closing out the game with Aero or Magneto as our big final impactful swing. I think Doom will fit in nicely here, as it gives us a little bit of redundancy in end of game effects, and it's possible this allows for a little bit more flexibility with our wave. Typically you really want to be saving it for that final turn lockout. However, maybe there's some times where you have a little bit awkward of a starting hand and you just want to wave on 3 in order to cheat out a big impactful threat such as Doom or Magneto. Typically though, Wave is used as a lockout piece. We use the move package in order to get ahead in the early game, try and be winning at least 2 out of the 3 lanes going into the final turn. Wave limits us and our opponent to only 1 card per turn, and then we usually use Aero or Magneto to close out the game, and Doom just gives us another option here in terms of being able to go wide rather than going tall or just moving whatever our opponent ends up playing. Nightcrawler is another card that's been a really impressive addition to this deck. He naturally has nice move synergy with Miles and Kraven, but on top of that, it's another 1-drop that we can play on turn 5 with Wave, so we can do something like Nightcrawler, Wave, and Miles on turn 5, so we can get a whole ton of power on our Wave turn to keep us ahead going into that final turn to close out the game. And the last Doom deck we have here is one that's going to be using the newly released Silver Samurai and X-23. So in this deck, we're running X-23 and Wolverine as our main discard fodder for cards like Silver Samurai and Colleen Wing. Samurai is nice as it allows us to interact with our opponent's hand, and on top of that, it enables us getting a 1-cost stature, which has always been powerful. Colleen gives us a bit of redundancy here if we don't find our Silver Samurai, so we're still getting value out of X-23 and Wolverine. The mana ramp from X-23 can be very handy here, as playing Colleen on turn 2 can allow us to play out a 4-drop on turn 3 if we don't have Zabu, and getting out Wolverine essentially means we're paying 2 cost for 8 power and stats across 2 bodies, which is well above rate. In terms of the 4-drops we're running here, we have Shang-Chi as our main piece of interaction, Silver Samurai as our core piece of the discard package and another way to interact with our opponent and enable stature, Iron Lad for a bit of redundancy here. I do think some of the targets for Lad in this deck are a little bit mid. However, the high rolls are really, really high. If you manage to hit Samurai, Black Bolt, Doom, or even Captain Marvel, Lad's going to be doing a lot of work. Captain Marvel is the one questionable inclusion here that I'm not 100% sold on. I'm going to test it out to see how she performs, but you could also consider another impactful 4-drop here. Some ones that come to mind are Enchantress as another way to deal with ongoing threats, especially because I'm sure many people are going to be trying out Darkhawk decks. Or we could use Absorbing Man to double up on some of our powerful on-reveal effects. The main 2 I'd be thinking of here are Silver Samurai's effect, or when in combination with Zabu, allowing us to get off 2 Shang-Chis on the final turn of the game. Black Bolt just gives us another solid play on turn 5 that helps enable our stature, and Doom is back to being the king of the best thing you can hit off of Iron Lad, while still being a generally solid finisher that goes wide. Next up, we have our Lady Deathstrike decks. Now, full disclosure, I do not own this card, and I'm not planning to own this card. I think it's kind of neat. I do think the buff will help her, but I'm definitely going to wait and see how that ends up working out. However, we do have some brews here for you. This first one here is the KM Best List. I think it's definitely an interesting idea. We have Forge to buff up the Deathstrike. We have Psylocke as a way of cheating her out early on, as well as X-23, which can accomplish the same thing if we manage to blow it up with our Killmonger. Absorbing Man gives us a chance at copying her powerful effect on the final turn of the game, or even turn 5 if we manage to ramp her out early. Absorbing Man has some especially funny utility in this list. The obvious interaction here is between Lady Deathstrike copying Deathstrike for another chance at blowing up a lot of smaller power stuff in a lane. However, you could even use him as a sneaky way to get a second attempt at getting Galactus off if you try and play the card out on turn 5, but don't have enough power to win the lane. Vision and Jeff give us a bit of flexibility in being able to move our power around the board, so we keep the opponent guessing where we're actually playing, which can be especially handy if we're trying to land a surprise Galactus. Deathstrike is also useful here as a way to reduce our death by blowing up some of our own stones, as well as any opponent's cards that fall into her range. And then the other Lady Deathstrike deck we have here is going to be a Deadpool list. Deadpool decks are generally pretty straightforward, but the nice thing about this one is you kind of have multiple ways to victory. Forge is useful not only for Lady Deathstrike, but also for buffing up our own Deadpool to get him nice and big early so we can start doing that doubling effect. We have our typical destroy package here of stuff that blows things up in Venom, Carnage, Deathlock, and Killmonger. X23 is a pretty nice include in this deck, as blowing it up not only feeds our death, but also gives us an extra energy next turn, which can be useful for cheating out Nimrod or Arnim Zola. And death is our final payoff, giving us some more benefit from destroying all of our cards throughout the game. And to close out, we have some Rock Slide Darkhawk decks. Now, it's almost a meme at this point. Whenever a card goes to 3 mana, people start saying, hey, that might work in Silver Surfer. But it actually seems like it could be pretty decent here. So the idea with this one is we have a pretty solid overall Sarah Surfer type of deck. However, we do also benefit from the fact that this deck can run Forge and Absorbing Man at little additional cost for very big potential gains. With Rock Slide being a 3-cost card, we are able to do Rock Slide on 3 into Absorbing Man on 4, as well as the obvious Brood on 3 into Absorbing Man on 4 combo. Forge obviously has great synergy with Brood, as we've seen in the Patriot deck, but is also just a pretty decent 2-drop at this point, pumping up any of the things we want to play on turn 3. We have Korg as our other rock giver, Darkhawk as the payoff for putting rocks in the opponent's deck. We have Shadow King to take opponents by surprise and reduce their power. This can be especially helpful against other Brood Absorbing Man decks, however, do be a little careful with it, as it will reduce your own power if you use it on your own lane. Sarah reduces the cost of our cards on the final turn, so we can hopefully get out 3 3-drops, or maybe just play Surfer into Absorbing Man. And Mr. Fantastic just does a good job of spreading our power around the board. There are a lot of other 3-drops you could consider for this deck though, so feel free to customize it to your heart's content. And you could even consider running Zabu if you want to give yourself the ability to play our 4-cost cards along with 2 other 3-cost cards going into the final turn if we have Sarah active. And last but not least, we have a Darkhawk Bounce deck. So if you really like disruption and stopping your opponent's game plan, I think this is going to be the deck for you. I'm honestly shocked Bounce has been flying so under the radar after it was nerfed a few months back. I played the regular version of Bounce pretty recently, and the deck is still rather competitive for how few people end up playing it right now. And with the addition of Rock Slide, we now have another card that's pretty decent to slam on turn 3. We do have to drop some cards here in order to make room for the Darkhawk package, but I think it's definitely worth experimenting with. We have our impactful 1-drops such as Bast, Iceman, Kitty Pryde, and Korg, 2 main pieces of disruption, Bast to buff up our hand, and Kitty Pryde to just enable Angela in our overall bounce strategy. Black Widow's a card I think is actually being slept on right now and has really good synergy with Bast. Being able to deny your opponent a draw can be absolutely backbreaking versus certain decks that really need certain cards in the early game, particularly the Brood deck. And when we combine that with the fact that we're putting rocks in our opponent's deck and increasing the cost of their cards with Iceman, it can be very tricky for the opponent to execute their game plan. Mysterio Hitmonkey is still a really strong combo, and Bast is still great with both those cards. Mysterio essentially becoming a 2/9 at post Bast is still really strong. And even though Hitmonkey only gets +1 from Bast, the interaction with Mysterio is still incredibly powerful. Beast is great at being able to pick up our 1-drops, so that way we can rebuy their powerful effects, or save them towards the end of the game when we want to use them to fuel our big Hitmonkey. Rock Slide fills a nice spot in the curve where we now have something to do on turn 3 that not only disrupts our opponent, but also pumps our Darkhawk for later turns in the game. And both Darkhawk and Iron Man benefit from Bast and allow us to put a ton of power into one individual lane. And there we have it. Those are our 7 OTA decks for today. I'd love to hear what you think about the OTA in the comments below. Do you like these changes? Do you dislike them? Is there something else you wish was adjusted? I know I'm still waiting for my rescue buff. Hopefully one day. We'll see. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for the video. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.